Hello, this is not John T. Rhapsodes, purveyor of awesome, old-school audio stories. Mr. Rhapsodes has asked me to read his own original stories, all in the old-school style. And so, let us together hear the words of old. In the summer of 1585, an English colony stood as a fragile outpost in the vast wilderness of the New World. The settlers, a motley crew of adventurers, farmers, and aristocrats, had come seeking fortune, glory, and land. But the harsh reality of the colony was a brutal contrast to their hopes and dreams. The sun was oppressive, the mosquitoes thick, and the trees of the surrounding forest cast long, ominous shadows. Disease and hunger had claimed many lives, and distrust was rampant. Rumors circulated that most of the nearby natives were hostile, and many believed the land itself was under some kind of curse. Among the settlers was Edward Carver, an ambitious young man who had brought with him a redoubtable desire to carve out a name and fortune for himself. In England, Carver had been a scholar who spoke and read several languages. But here in the New World, his dreams and ambitions were fueled by the promise of untold riches and the glory of discovery rather than academic endeavors. But he was also practical. He understood that without food and protection, the colony would wither and die. It was a balance he struggled to strike, the cold pragmatism of survival clashing with the lofty ideals of building a new world. One evening, after a grueling day of planting and tending the pathetic crops in the oppressive heat, Carver took a solitary walk by the edge of the forest. The land around the fort had proven difficult to tame, with soil that seemed so poor for farming. But something in the air that evening felt different. There was an eerie stillness. The breeze did not rustle the leaves, and even the birds and crickets had gone quiet. Just then, as he passed a thick cluster of trees, Carver saw something that brought a cold sweat upon his brow. There, on the other side of a clearing, stood a figure. It was a woman who appeared as if she too was from the old world, but not someone he recognized. She wore a strange gown, something woven with patterns that seemed foreign even for the native peoples of this land. Her hair was long and silver, hanging like a curtain of moonlight over her shoulders. Her skin was pale as marble, and her eyes glowed with a strange intensity, like the moonlight itself shone from inside. She did not speak but simply watched him, as if waiting for something. Carver, always curious, felt a sudden pull toward her. He stepped into the clearing, and when his foot struck the soft earth, the air seemed to shift. It was as if the world around him had slipped out of time, the quiet deeper, the shadows longer. He opened his mouth to speak, but could not. The woman smiled and tilted her head slightly, and then she spoke, not in a language Carver knew, but in one that he understood nonetheless. Her voice was lilting, almost hypnotic. "The harvest is near, Edward Carver," she said, "but you must choose man's harvest or the harvest of the land." Carver's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" But she was already stepping backward into the darkened woods. She vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. Carver remained there, confused, his mind racing, and then a movement at the edge of the trees caught his eye. Dozens of figures emerged, all dressed in the same otherworldly clothing. They did not speak, but their eyes watched him with an eerie intensity. After a few silent moments, they all melted back into the dark wood. Carver recalled a recent warning from one of the old Native Americans who muttered in broken French about avoiding some kind of evil, elusive tribe nearby. He must have been warning of these strange people. The next morning, the settlers were abuzz with strange news. A large crop of corn had appeared overnight, covering several acres of land that had been barren for months. The corn was healthy and vibrant, with the promise of a bountiful harvest that would save the colony from starvation. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Even the most experienced farmers could not explain how it had grown so quickly. A preacher issued many dread warnings and maledictions against participating in this dark magic that went unheeded by all. Carver stood at the edge of the field, staring at the golden corn, his mind racing. Could this be the harvest the strange woman had spoken of? Was this the answer to the colony's woes? Could they trust it? As he walked toward the center of the field, he noticed something unsettling. The corn was not all it appeared to be. It seemed to ripple, like something under the surface of it was moving. Then, from between the rows of corn, he saw the strange moon-eyed woman again, standing silently, watching him. The other figures were with her, faces pale, all their eyes with the same pale moonglow. There was no mistaking it. They were not human. They were something else, something ancient, perhaps tied to the land itself. "The harvest is not for you," the woman said softly, stepping closer. "This harvest is ours. You are but a guest here, and now you have overstayed your welcome." Before Carver could respond, a rustling noise behind him caused him to turn. The other settlers were approaching the field, their eyes wide with wonder at the sight of the crops. But as they neared the edge of the cornfield, they stopped, their faces twisted in fear and confusion. The corn began to change, shifting into something far darker. The green and golden stalks darkened to an unnerving shade of black, their leaves curling into sharp, jagged points, like claws reaching up from the earth. Then, in a horrifying instant, the crops began to move. It was no longer just a field of corn, it was alive. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the earth split open, revealing twisted roots that grasped and clawed at the settlers, dragging them into the soil. Those who tried to flee were swallowed by the ground, their screams echoing in the air as the twisted roots tightened around them. Carver stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. The woman stepped closer, her face an expression of pity. "You sought the harvest," she whispered, her voice cold as winter. "But the land was not yours to claim. Now it will claim you." As the last of the settlers were dragged into the earth, the field of corn began to settle, the land once again becoming still. Carver collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by the horror unfolding around him. He had wanted a future, a life of glory and discovery. But what had he found? The woman turned away, but before she vanished back into the forest, she gave him one last pitying look. "The harvest is always more than it seems, Edward Carver," she said. "It is not just the land that reaps." Carver blinked, and for a moment he was alone. But then, in the corner of his eye, he saw the figure again, the woman still standing in the field watching him. Her eyes were no longer filled with pity, but with something else entirely. Her gaze softened for a brief moment. "You have the land now, Edward," she said, "but you must live with it." Carver slowly turned his head and looked behind him. The settlers, the land, the cursed harvest, everything had disappeared. In their place stood only a thick forest, the faintest traces of the colony's existence swallowed by time. The buildings were gone, the fields visible through the trees barren again. He turned his gaze to a vast old oak and saw strange markings carved in its rough bark. There was no Roanoke colony anymore. Only Edward Carver, the carvings on the oak, and this lonely, desolate wood.